Hey everybody, this is the Holy Hand Grenade. Welcome to the show. Taking every thought captive, we assault the boundaries of reality. In this quantum game of hide and seek. It's a new perspective of Earth from Earth. This is the Reality Distortion Effect on Take on the World TV.
Here are the facts. It's no secret that the U.S. conducts covert experiments and research. While the details are murky, it is common knowledge that the U.S. has several top-secret locations dedicated to the creation, testing, and analysis of the weapons of the future. These so-called black projects do not officially exist, and there is little oversight from Congress. Some research yields amazing results, such as the B-2 Spirit and hydrogen bombs. But black projects have also led to spectacular failures. For decades, conspiracy theorists have been fascinated by these projects, and their claims often capture public attention. The Philadelphia experiment is one of these alleged failures. Skeptics have dismissed it as nonsense, and conspiracy theorists have accused the government of covering up the truth. But it all comes down to one question: who was Carlos Allende? Here's where it gets crazy. In the mid-1950s, a UFO researcher named Morris Jessup received bizarre letters from a man calling himself Carlos Allende. According to Allende, in 1943, the U.S. Navy experimented with force fields, attempting to render an entire destroyer escort invisible. He called this the Philadelphia experiment. Carlos claimed that he was aboard a merchant ship called the USS Furuseth and bound for Algeria when he watched the USS Eldridge disappear into thin air, only to reappear soon after. Allende claimed this was evidence that Albert Einstein had solved the unified field theory, and the government was using this knowledge to experiment with teleportation and invisibility. He also claimed that the Eldridge's crew suffered lasting side effects. Allegedly, one of the sailors simply vanished in a crowded bar. Jessup asked for proof. The next letter arrived from a man calling himself Carl M. Allen, claiming he would attempt to recall more details via hypnosis. At this point, any normal person would have written Carlos off as a loon, and Jessup did just that. But the plot thickened in 1957 when the Office of Naval Research contacted Mr. Jessup. Someone had mailed them a parcel containing a heavily annotated copy of Jessup's book. The sender, Carlos Allende. At this point, the story began to spread throughout the world of conspiracies. Over the years, it has been embellished, debunked, and revived. Skeptics such as Cecil Adams dismissed the theory, pointing out that the Navy claims it had no knowledge of the experiment. According to mainstream investigators, the U.S. may have been attempting to render ship hulls functionally invisible to torpedoes, but that's a far cry from vanishing. This hasn't stopped conspiracy theorists. Some have even claimed to be aboard the Eldridge when the experiment took place. Other skeptics note that this story essentially traces back to one person. So who exactly is he? Some theorists believe that Carlos Allende was replaced by a CIA source using the name Carl Allen. This is far from the most outlandish claim about Carlos Allende. He's also been accused of working for the government as a disinfo agent, of working for aliens, and even of being an alien himself. So where does this leave us? Was Carlos Allende a government agent, an employee of ET's, or just a garden variety lunatic? The utter lack of any corroborating evidence has convinced the skeptics that the Philadelphia experiment was a hoax. But to the conspiracy theorists, it's only proof of something they don't want you to know.
The letter claims that 12 years previously, at the height of World War II, the Navy had conducted several radical experiments in Philadelphia aboard a destroyer, the USS Eldridge, that made it simply vanish into thin air. During one trial, the ship rematerialized 200 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, before disappearing again and reappearing once more in Philadelphia. The letter attributes the technology that made the ship invisible to Albert Einstein, saying the great genius had secretly developed a single unified theory to tie together all of the laws of physics.
A unified field theory combines the equations that govern the interaction of matter with itself and with light, and with both of those with gravity. The idea is, if we can come up with this elegant set of equations that explains the way the universe works, perhaps we can do something with those. Bend light, change the nature of space-time, teleport, render things invisible.
Einstein himself said he was working on this theory, but never cracked it. According to the letter's author, he secretly had. And at the height of World War II, the Navy used his idea to bend light and to make a warship invisible.
How we see an object is that the light illuminates it. Laser illuminates our model ship. You can see it. You can see the green flashing off of it. However, the idea of using unified field theory is that you could then redirect this light so that it no longer passes across the object, but just goes around it.
And to win this game, all you have to do is see the reality that's in front of you as it really is. All right? So we have two panels here of colored dots, and one of those dots is the same in the two panels. Okay? And you have to tell me which one. Now I'll narrow it down to the gray one, the green one, and say the orange one. So by a show of hands, we'll start with the easiest one. Show of hands, how many people think it's the gray one? Really? Okay. How many people think it's the green one? And how many people think it's the orange one? So pretty even split. So let's find out what the reality is. Here is the orange one. Right? Here's the green one. And here's the gray one. So for all of you saw that, you're complete. So this is pretty amazing, actually, isn't it? Because nearly every living system has evolved the ability to detect light in one way or another. So for us, seeing color is one of the simplest things the brain does. And yet, even at this most fundamental level, context is everything. What is color for? And instead of telling you, I'll just show you. What you see here is a jungle scene, and you see the surfaces according to the amount of light that those surfaces reflect. Now, can any of you see the predator that's about to jump out at you? And if you haven't seen it yet, you're dead, right? Can anyone see it? Anyone? No? Now let's see the surfaces according to the quality of light that they reflect. And now you see it, right? So color enables us to see the similarities and differences between surfaces according to the full spectrum of light that they reflect. But what you've just done is in many respects mathematically impossible. Why? Because, as Berkeley tells us, we have no direct access to our physical world other than through our senses. And the light that falls onto our eyes is determined by multiple things in the world, not only the color of objects, but also the color of their illumination and the color of the space between us and those objects. You vary any one of those parameters, and you'll change the color of the light that falls onto your eye. This is a huge problem because it means that the same image could have an infinite number of possible real-world sources. So let me show you what I mean. Imagine that this is the back of your eye, okay? And these are two projections from the world. They're identical in every single way. Identical in shape, size, spectral content. They are the same as far as your eye is concerned. And yet, they come from completely different sources. The one on the right comes from a yellow surface in shadow, oriented facing the left, viewed through a pinkish medium. The one on the left comes from an orange surface under direct light, facing to the right, viewed through a sort of a bluish medium. Completely different meanings, giving rise to the exact same retinal information. And yet, it's only the retinal information that we get. So how on earth do we even see? So if you remember anything in this next 18 minutes, remember this, that the light that falls onto your eye, sensory information, is meaningless because it could mean literally anything. And what's true for sensory information is true for information generally. There's no inherent meaning in information. It's what we do with that information that matters.
A cataract is a clouding of the lens in your eye that affects vision. Most cataracts are related to aging. To understand how a cataract can affect your vision, it helps to understand a little about the structure of your eye. The lens is clear and lies behind the iris and the pupil. It works much like a camera lens, focusing light or an image on the retina. The retina is the light-sensitive tissue at the back of the eye. Once the light or image reaches the retina, it is changed into nerve signals that are sent to the brain. Besides focusing light on the retina, the lens also adjusts the eye's focus, letting us see things clearly both up close and far away. The lens must be clear for the retina to receive a sharp image. The lens is made of mostly water and protein. The protein is arranged in a precise way that allows light to pass through it without distortion. But as we age, the proteins in the lens clump together, causing a cataract. At first, the protein may clump together and cloud a small area of the lens. Over time, the clouds may increase in size and number, clouding more of the lens. If the lens is cloudy from a cataract, the image you see will be blurred, and colors may appear faded.
Now, there's a big Nazi connection here because they were able to mix this human factor study with the study of the Mengele studies. Joseph Mengele did all these studies on twins, on Jews, brutal experiments on Jews and twins.
It's basically the basis for the mind control experiments of MK Ultra.
One of the questions that I've received quite often as of late on my radio show is Julian Assange from WikiLeaks an insider, an operative, a plant, someone working for the best interest of the global elite's master plan for world domination? And so after being asked that question several times and coming across some of the regular data and information that a lot of other people had come up with, things like ties to some of the WikiLeaks guys to the Israeli Mossad, as well as George Soros, I started sort of seeing those things and those explanations as being sort of easy cover things, but not really being as deep as you would think someone like this would be concerning what we're talking about here with the implications of WikiLeaks, with the shutting down of the existing internet. This is already happening in places like Hungary, in the EU, where now they're going to be coming after any and all media outlets who put out information that is contrary to what the state or the government deems appropriate for the masses to comprehend and understand. So after looking into some of these various ties and connections with Julian Assange, I noticed one thing in particular that sort of stuck out as a sore thumb to me. And this was his association with this very interesting cult. And according to freely available information on the internet, in fact, a lot of this stuff is found in as many mainstream places as Wikipedia and everything else, which I know also sometimes has disinformation, but there's lots of credible sources on this information. Julian Assange was born in Melbourne, Australia in 1971, and when he was 8, his mother, Christine, married a member of this cult called the Santini Catan. I think is how you pronounce that. It's kind of a weird spelling, but Santini Catan Park Association, which is also known as a group called the Family, or it's also known as the White Brotherhood.
Why did you start to take in the children?
Over 21 years, 28 young people went through our hands.
Why did you do that?
I love children.
Once she became the leader of the cult and could get whatever she wanted, one thing that she wanted was lots of little children.
She was preparing us for, when the time happens, to re-educate the world. What's left of it.
How many are your natural children?
There were 8 or 9. We never told them they weren't ours.
We were all children who had no identity whatsoever.
They were stolen children, phony adoptions that were organised by sect members.
I'm wondering if you've got any comment to make now about the children.
Shots are being fired through windows. Car tyres are being slashed. There are death threats.
Auntie Anne sucked as much money out of people as she possibly could.
Yesterday, 7 members of Anne Hamilton Burns' sect pleaded guilty of defrauding the Commonwealth.
I know that Muktananda practiced black magic. That's why Anne was there to learn more about it.
There were so many bizarre stories about who she was.
I didn't even know that Auntie Anne had another name.
Waiting for redemption, like a dog expecting a reward. Is this the
In the 70s, we didn't talk about it. Unmarried mothers, young girls, 16, 17, who fell pregnant, who often weren't seen for months on end. And then they would appear back in their normal lives and communities, and they would have gone through their pregnancy. No one knew that they had given birth, but the child had been passed over.
In the late 60s, there wasn't supporting mothers' pension and things like that. And particularly if you came from a religious family, it was still a great shame to have a kid out of wedlock. Well, my biological mother was made to sign an adoption form, and then during my birth, a pillow was put over her head. She was given major tranquilizers, and as soon as I was born, I was taken away instantly. She wasn't even allowed to look at me.
Most mothers who talk about this say something like, I heard a cry, then I heard a door slam. And that's the child being taken out. The idea was if you see the child, it'll be even harder to part with it.
This couple have been waiting 11 months to adopt a baby boy. Today is the first time they will see him. Now they must wait patiently for the fulfillment of the 30-day consent period. If the mother of the baby decides to revoke her decision, this couple would have to give him up. But this distressing situation rarely happens. This little illegitimate bundle will become legitimized. By adoption, this child will escape the handicap of its birth. His real mother will almost certainly never set eyes on him again. And with all the love he can expect from his new parents, he may never feel the loss. In this case, one woman's loss could turn out to be somebody else's gain.
John Mackay was one of those who adopted a child and let Anne Hamilton Byrne look after him.
Dan and Bill wanted to construct a family of these children, to rear them as a family, I think for very good psychological reasons. You know, they've been able to provide a stable environment with a lot of love.
Something that you weren't able to do?
That's true. I wasn't able.
I wanted to ask him if he knew, after he handed that child over, what had happened to that child, the brutality it had experienced.
Mari Moore's my name, Dr. McKay. I'm wondering if you've got any comment to make now about what happened to the children. Why won't you have... Is that all you've got to say, Dr. McKay, after what you've put those kids through? There's no need for that, Dr. McKay.
About a year after that, around about 1971, pulled me aside one day and he said, I'm going to give you a healing on the weekend. And he said, I'm going to put a scarf around your head, I'm going to give you psilocybin, and you're going to see pretty colours. Then I was in a completely different world. I felt pressure on my chest and I felt hands on me, down towards my genital area and then around the back. For the next few days, I'd had bleeding from my anus and I had a lot of pain around that area. I know that he sexually assaulted me in some way, form or shape.
You couldn't hear those stories without it affecting you, if you had any heart at all. I don't think at first that anyone in the authorities realised the complexities of the sect, and so they thought they were perhaps dealing with a child abuse case, and they were, but I don't think they realised the layers underneath that.
Now, what's interesting is the White Brotherhood is a group that Madame Blavatsky had talked about in some of her work when she created Theosophy. When they started the American branch of Theosophy, this is when they started turning it into a one world, new world order concept and a one world government concept when they integrated it with the UN. Of course, the UN has theosophical temples inside of the United Nations building, and they published books by Alice Bailey, who became the head of the American branch of Theosophy, and they published these books under the Lucifer Trust, and then later it became the Lucius Trust. But this American version and branch of Theosophy, which broke off from the original branch of Theosophy, was very much not the same. But you can see how all things get hijacked and taken and turned into this. And coincidentally enough, the woman who was the head of this cult that Julian Assange and his mother were part of, the White Brotherhood. The White Brotherhood was talked about, some of the many groups that concerned the Aryans. This is things that Blavatsky had talked about. And these were things that the Nazis had taken on. They had taken on the work of Blavatsky, and they were seeking to find the Aryans. And this is where sort of the bastardization of Blavatsky's work started taking place. But it's an interesting connection with the Nazis and Theosophy and some of these other connections to Julian Assange we're going to get into here in a minute. We're also going to have a clip here in this short video presentation. It's from a 1991 documentary on the occult and Nazis, and it talks about some of this Blavatsky stuff. But interestingly enough, Anne Hamilton Byrne is the woman who was in charge of the family, or the White Brotherhood. I had a friend not too long ago ask me if I knew what the family was, and I didn't know what family he was talking about. Now I understand this is the White Brotherhood. Well, this woman, Anne Hamilton Byrne, coincidentally enough, was also a theosophist. So there we have the connection with Theosophy, with the Nazis, with Anne Hamilton Byrne, who was a self-proclaimed theosophist herself. She kidnapped children. As many as 28 children had been collected and kidnapped, and these children were selected allegedly for their Aryan traits. Now, what's interesting is that, and this is on the public record, you can type Julian Assange, LSD, and you'll find out that one of the things they would do to these children, they're very strange looking. They look like the kids out of the Children of the Damned or the Village of the Damned. And you start to find out that these kids were dosed with Sandoz LSD 25 when you learn that the Sandoz Corporation, which had the only patent for pharmaceutical grade LSD, was also, coincidentally enough, with the IG Farben Corporation. Sandoz was directly tied to IG Farben. They were a division of IG Farben. And of course, IG Farben was found to be funneling money to the Nazis during World War II. And of course, Prescott Bush was caught up in that whole deal with IG Farben. And so there are some other connections as well that we'll get into with the IG Farben thing here in just a bit, and the Sandoz connections here in just a bit in this film. And then, of course, we have Joseph Mengele and his involvement as being an architect of the MKUltra project for mind control. Mengele was protected by the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA in the United States. And after Operation Paperclip, Mengele went to work for the CIA's MKUltra projects here in America. Now, what's interesting is that the CIA and MKUltra also got their LSD for their MKUltra mind control experiments. So that then yet again, we have another connection there to the Nazis, to Sandoz, which then, of course, connects back to this cult who were also following Nazi ideologies, calling themselves the White Brotherhood, coming from Blavatsky's work, where also Anne Hamilton Byrne was a self-proclaimed theosophist. And then we have things like the stories of Mengele having these colonies in South America, genetically breeding children that were of pure Aryan descent. And this is exactly what the cult was doing. So it stands to reason with this very circumstantial evidence here that this cult very well could have been a part of the Mengele Aryan child production operation. And so it stands to reason that Julian Assange very well could be one of the real-life boys from Brazil. Did you ever see that film? There's a movie you can watch, a Hollywood movie called The Boys from Brazil, and Gregory Peck plays Joseph Mengele. And in this Hollywood movie, they detail all of this stuff of the creation of these new Aryan children that are supposed to go out and take over the world. And so when we see those connections, which connect back to Sandoz and to the Nazis, to LSD, to the White Brotherhood, this cult that his mother and Julian Assange were both a part of, we then have the connection of Julian Assange to Carl Lundstrom. Now, Carl Lundstrom is the son of Ulf Lundstrom and the grandson of Carl Edvard Lundstrom. He was the founder of the world's largest crisp bread producer, and Carl Lundstrom was one of the 5 heirs to the Wasabrod and its subsidiary OLW. And in 1982, this Wallacebrod bread company was sold by Carl Lundstrom to the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz, which in turn made Carl Lundstrom a fortune. Now, that was in 1982 when he did this deal, selling his father's bread company to Sandoz, which, coincidentally enough, LSD compounds are made from ergot, which actually comes from mold from bread. And this is what had happened originally with the Salem witch trials, is they had essentially, many people believe that they had ergot poisoning, which was causing hallucinations, and this is why they were burned at the stake. But the interesting thing here is that Carl Lundstrom goes on to be the guy that has the servers that hosted the BitTorrent tracker, the Pirate Bay, and we know all the things that have been in the media about them and how the RIA and others have now tried to come down on the internet and come down on people for illegal file sharing. And here's Carl Lundstrom involved with the Pirate Bay while at the same time hosting the servers for none other than WikiLeaks. So yet again, another connection to Sandoz, to WikiLeaks, to Carl Lundstrom, and back to Julian Assange. So it seems that a lot of things that have been said out there in internet radio and the alternative research community about this operation of WikiLeaks being designed to bring down the existing internet and do away with films like this and radio shows like mine and others out there. We see two cases of this, not only with the WikiLeaks, but also with the Pirate Bay, which has been a huge thing for shutting down file sharing systems and basically doing away with the internet as it is now. Let's watch this clip concerning Nazis, the occult, and Helena Blavatsky, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the Assange situation. Here it is.
While science and medicine are rejected as products of the Industrial Revolution, vegetarianism, herbal healing, nudism, communal living and meditation become fashionable pursuits. In every major city, cults devoted to spiritualism, astrology, magic, and the occult flourish among the disciples of life reform. Of all the doctrines favored by the movement, none will be more influential than those preached by the Russian adventuress and telepath, Madame Helena Blavatsky. In 1888, Madame Blavatsky claimed to have traveled to Tibet and there to have been initiated into the secrets of spiritual masters she calls the hidden elect. In the doctrines of occultists, the hidden elect, or the Great White Brotherhood, are believed to be humans who by initiation and self-denial have risen to become adepts. They have gained powers and knowledge beyond those of ordinary mortals. In Britain, Aleister Crowley, a magician of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, claimed in 1909 to have crossed the abyss and to have returned as an adept. Madame Blavatsky did not claim to be an adept in her own right, but she did claim constant telepathic communication with her hidden masters. They had revealed to her, their chosen one, the occult history of the human race. According to Madame Blavatsky, each round of the cosmic cycle has associated with it 7 root races. The first root race to evolve on Earth she calls the astral race. It was a race of pure spirit, the highest form of existence. The second race she calls the Hyperborean race. Its home was a now vanished continent in the Northern Ocean. The third race was the Lemurians. Blavatsky is clear about the reason for the fall of the Lemurian race. It had interbred with animals. The fourth race in the history revealed to Madame Blavatsky is the race of Atlantis. The Atlanteans had possessed psychic powers and had constructed giant cities using an energy source of mysterious origins. The Atlanteans were destroyed in a great flood. The fifth root race Madame Blavatsky sees as the race of hope. The race that had once founded the culture of ancient Greece and soon would return man to the pinnacle of spirituality. That race she named the Aryan. By 1914, Blavatsky's mystical doctrine of the destiny of Aryan man has spread throughout Germany and Austria.
A few more things that I'd like to add here concerning Julian Assange that I find very interesting are his admitted connections to a member of Australian intelligence who Assange claims has advised him on matters concerning the cult that his mother and he were both involved with, the Great White Brotherhood, the Santinican Park Association. It's a mouthful, so I'll put it up on the screen. But also among those on the receiving end of the cult services was a gentleman by the name of Lord Casey, a former Governor General of Australia and the minister in charge of overseeing the Australian intelligence services, with which Assange claims to be connected, and also a gentleman by the name of Ronald Conway, who is one of Australia's most prominent Catholic intellectuals. So we don't really have to go into the ties between the Catholics and the Nazis and Hitler, and of course with Pope Ratzinger being a former Nazi youth. I'll leave that up to you to research on your own. So that's a highly interesting connection, again, with Catholics, with the idea of eugenics. I've talked about many times on my show and also in my first documentary film on the subject of the Council for National Policy, a gentleman by the name of Roger Pearson. Now, Roger Pearson had worked with Joseph Mengele on some of his projects concerning Auschwitz. And so I have an article here from the Psychology Wiki, which is an information on psychologists. This is a very mainstream thing you can go and find. Roger Pearson, born in 1927, is a British anthropologist, advocate of eugenics, and editor of several scholarly journals published by the Institute for the Study of Man. Originally from Great Britain, Pearson has also served as colonial officer in the British Army to India, then directed various British-controlled companies there. He studied at the University of London, where he gained a master's degree in economics and sociology and a PhD in anthropology. In 1958, Pearson founded the Northern League to foster the interests, friendships, and solidarity of all Teutonic nations. He recruited Hans F. Gunther, who received awards under the National Socialist regime for his work on race. Ernest Cox of the Ku Klux Klan, and Dr. Wilhelm Kesserow, a former SS officer. He joined the Eugenics Society in 1963 and became a fellow in 1977. Pearson was brought to the United States in 1965 by Willis Carto of the Liberty Lobby and contributed in some of Carto's publications such as Western Destiny and the Noontide Press. At the end of the 1960s, he parted with Carto and successfully taught at Queen's University of Charlotte, the University of Southern Mississippi, and Montana Tech. During his tenure as dean at Montana Tech, Pearson received $60,000 from the Pioneer Fund. In 1975, he left academics and moved to Washington, D.C., where he founded the Council on American Affairs. He also joined the editorial board of Policy Review, the monthly Heritage Foundation publication, in 1977, but was forced to resign in 1978 after the Washington Post exposed Pearson's background following the 11th conference of the World Anti-Communist League, which he chaired. Now, isn't that interesting? All of those connections. The World Anti-Communist League, we know there's connections with that, with, of course, Larry McDonald, who was the former head of the John Birch Society, who was Jesuit trained. We have his connection in admissions with Willis Carto, who was head of the Liberty Lobby and the Spotlight magazine, which, of course, Jim Tucker, one of the Patriot Sacred Cows, writes for and does his Bilderberg coverage for. So we start to see a very tangled mess here. We also start to see connections with Julian Assange and the Council for National Policy and the people that make up that group. So that leads us to the fact that we have an operation within an operation. This is why we have had a very distinct and immediate campaign by the Truth Movement, alternative research community, with an immediate condemnation of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. This has been their job. This is why I felt the need to make this little documentary so we could really peel back the layers of the onion here. Now, another interesting connection, I think, to all of this, I'd like to close with this, is the fact that right in the middle of this WikiLeaks thing really going huge in the media, you had the release, the late release of the film Tron Legacy. Now, this film was originally scheduled to come out in the summer of 2010, and it was delayed until December of 2010, right in the heart of the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange scandals. The interesting thing about this is that the themes of the movies pertaining to cyber warfare and espionage within the computer world, and also, coincidentally enough, very much like the character of the Merovingian in the Matrix films. we have a character that is sort of the middleman in this film, much in the same way that the Merovingian was in The Matrix. Except in Tron Legacy, the character that is very similar to the Merovingian, both scenes take place within a nightclub, and both gentlemen seem to be the mediators or the middlemen to the next level of the story. Now, that seems to be the role of Julian Assange. He seems to be the middleman between these various entities leaking this information and this information becoming available to the public. So in the movie Tron Legacy, we have this character by the name of Zeus, which in and of itself is symbolic. But what's even more symbolic is this gentleman takes on the appearance that is very similar to Julian Assange. He has the slick back blonde hair, very Aryan, white brotherhood looking, and he is used by the elite within the movie to gain what they need and then thrown away, which is what a lot of people believe is going to happen to Julian Assange. Now, the other interesting connection with this character of Zeus in Tron and with the Merovingian is that, of course, the connection of the title of the Merovingian to the Merovingian bloodline, which also relates to the Aryans and the pure bloodlines of the Illuminati, which have so much importance to the elite master controllers. So when you think about the Merovingian character in line with the Zeus character, and Zeus being one of the demigods who is said to be a part of this Merovingian bloodline, we have a very interesting connection here when you think about the connections we've outlined with the Nazis and with the Aryans and the White Brotherhood and the rest of it. Very interesting stuff. I hope that you'll dig into this more on your own. Hopefully we can get this out there to people so they'll understand what this really is. And this is to come down on alternative researchers like you and I and everyone out here. This is not designed for the mainstream media. This is being designed to come after us.
And again, you know, it's a BS thing just to sucker people in. That's all it is. That's all it is. And people, if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, well, Tori, I don't know what Scientology is. And I say to him over and over, neither does anyone. That was designed by Hubbard. He said, make it a mystery sandwich so that the real stuff is inside and they have to go inside to get it. And now once they're inside, you get surrounded, you've got the peer pressure, you've got all the, you know, mind control stuff, and it's very difficult to get away from it.
You should be well aware that we have been on your plane. We have been your pilot and the concierge in your hotel. We know who Christ is, and his hand is in this, and that should be the most alarming thing you have heard in this entire video. It is the office held, it is not Jesus's last name. We are anonymous, and your church can expect us.
Quinn, you've put forth some pretty controversial theories about this QAnon phenomenon. And so far, I haven't heard anybody prove you wrong. We've had people who have refused to have their information challenged by you. But what have you got to share with us today on this matter of who's tweeting what about whom? And Quinn, what's happening over there for you?
Well, over the last year, I've been working on my intelligence platform, which it has things like, you know, chatbot interfaces. It monitors, you know, open web APIs like Twitter. And so for the last, I don't know, about a week or so since you and I, you know, right around the time you and I had that phone conversation with Dr. Corsi, I believe it was, I started monitoring the QAnon stuff, you know, a little bit more heavily because, you know, you and I had talked and then we talked to him and you know, a lot of the loops just didn't seem to be, you know, really matching up. Like everyone was talking about the white rabbit and everyone was talking about, you know, all these key phrases that I had been researching with Tyler.
Right.
So I decided to kind of dig a little bit more into like a bit more of the QAnon stuff to see how it was related to Tyler, and that's kind of when I came across that map that I sent to you, the QAnon map.
Right.
Flash break. This one, shall we play a game? Hope you guys
Shall we play a game?
can see that. Zoom in a little bit more.
Hope you guys can
There we
see
go.
that.
Future unlocks past.
Shall we play a game? Future unlocks past. Ready to meet Tyler? Thanks to Jordan. This is the intro into Tyler. Shall we play a game? That's how Tyler always starts up. See, and I can tell you, let's go to the paste bin. Okay. Hive Mind, Code Tyler. That was a link directly from Shall We Play a Game? So next, we have Project 2020, Project Mayhem 2020, which is what they're doing right now with all the QAnon stuff, is they're creating mayhem. And just to show you some of the images for Tyler, in Tyler We Trust, Project Mayhem 2020, Anonymous, 2020, Tyler, again, inside of a big mainframe computer, like a big AI, 2020, EtherSec, and then last but not least, Reality Hacking Mind Virus. Woo. And then Anonymous Project Mayhem. Tyler. Anonymous.
Help us understand what it is that I'm not getting about QAnon. I've been very skeptical of QAnon. You, of course, have shared your theory that QAnon is somehow involved with artificial intelligence, either a person or a team of people using AI. And Tyler, of course, is the communications network that's controlled by AI that you've identified some time ago. Yeah. So in this map, this is very confusing to me. Like, what are we looking at here?
It's a real confusing map. Basically, what it tries to do is outline the whole map of conspiracies. But if you go all the way down to the bottom of the map, and you look right there, you see the Zuckerberg, Facebook, AI, Palantir, Tyler, Hive Project.
I see that. Here's Zuckerberg.
Project Mayhem 2020, Eric Schmidt. That little section right there, according to the QAnon map, is very important, and that's all the research that you and I have pretty much been doing for the last year.
Now, Quinn, who made this map? I can't read this. This looks like a jumble of crap to me.
It does, but there's certain key elements inside of it. The QAnon community basically made and supports this.
I see.
And I found it on another link to like Follow the White Rabbit, another link to Alice in Wonderland. These basic Alice in Wonderland, White Rabbit, Unlock the Matrix, the standard PSYOP key triggers that you and I have been talking about for the last year.
Okay.
So I was looking at this map, and then if you go right over to the right side of the map, you see the Vegas massacre comes up, and then you see the QAnon phenomenon, right?
This right here?
Yeah.
Saudi purge. Where's Vegas? I don't see Vegas.
Go back. Vegas is in the middle.
The
Vegas massacre.
Donald Trump inauguration. Oh, we see it right here. Pyramid sacrifice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, our research is directly according to the QAnon map. The research that you and I are doing into things like Vegas Massacre and that we're doing into Palantir and Tyler, it's all part of the QAnon Follow the White Rabbit map, because if you look at the middle, right at the bottom, it says Follow the White Rabbit.
Oh, yeah. Right. Now, you've told us that, of course, the White Rabbit is a timing server, and
that's one of the things it is. The White Rabbit is a key to lead you to the system, essentially. The network.
System? The network.
The network.
neutrino communication network?
The big giant communications network that operates this conspiracy that people are drawing maps about.
I see. Okay.
Because if you have a big giant conspiracy like this with a bunch of arrows going everywhere, like on a map of like lots of people, well, you need a private communication system for all those people to communicate.
I mean, Quinn, it strikes me that this map is just designed to obfuscate more than illuminate anything. I mean,
it is, and that's the point, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, where I went to with my research of digging into the QAnon stuff when I saw that somehow the Tyler stuff that I was researching was on that map, and QAnon was on that weird obfuscated map. It got me to dig into it more. So then I added QAnon to my real-time tag monitor, so I started monitoring who was tweeting about QAnon the most over Twitter. And I've collected so far somewhere in the range of like 400,000 tweets.
Wow.
And when I do an analysis of those tweets and I basically get a top 10 or a top 50, Jerome Corsi comes up more than anyone else. And besides QAnon and the hog kid that was in Florida that everyone's talking about being a staged actor.
So what's the significance? I mean, Jerome Corsi, obviously, he's become sort of the de facto leader on the QAnon, deciphering the tweets and all that, or the posts.
That's where we come to next, is then I did research into Dr. Jerome Corsi, and part of my research into Tyler is that the people that are operating Tyler, they offer people over YouTube extended features, or they offer them technological capabilities that they wouldn't otherwise have. And their package operates in a standard way where it operates through Discord chat, so the chat bots can get in and the AI bots can get in and do work with you without being spotted. Right. And then they operate usually a Reddit thread, and then they populate the data from channels coming out of 4chan.
Let's carry on with more of the research that you've been doing. So they're using Tyler. Help me understand that. How are they using it? What is it that the people that are following QAnon and think it's a person who's, a military intelligence guy, how are they wrong and how is this theory right? That's what I'm trying to clarify and understand for myself.
Okay, so Tyler is what's called a multi-agent system.
Right.
So human beings are creatures of habit, and I've done more tests than you could imagine on the internet. Human beings don't share anything unless there's someone in a position of authority already sharing it. Human beings won't comment on blog posts or YouTube videos. Human beings are very difficult.
But really, though, wait, let me stop you.
Yeah,
people comment on my videos.
Let me finish with the psychology.
Okay, sorry.
So, but in psychological circumstances, human beings flock, or they swarm to certain things when there's a certain number of involvement. You can see this example. There's a video on YouTube where there's a guy standing in a field dancing by himself all erratically, and everybody's making fun of the guy until one other person goes and starts dancing, and then shortly after, everybody starts and goes dancing. Okay, it's called crowd dynamics.
Right. Okay.
So the average human being, when they're faced with something unknown or something unfamiliar or something that they're afraid to partake in, they ridicule it. Mm-hmm. They don't partake in it. To get human beings to partake in something, you have to have a certain amount of involvement, or else they just don't care. So what Tyler is doing for these people, and I don't disagree with QAnon. I think a lot of the stuff that they're doing is information, that same research that Tyler's been walking me through. It's just they're doing it under a different name, and they would have a much more powerful impact if they would use Tyler instead of QAnon. It would be much more powerful.
Well, it's hard to imagine more impact. QAnon is definitely a phenomenon unlike anything we've seen, at least in the alternate news.
It's the most successful anonymous operation ever.
Yes, I agree with that.
It's because it's a very large group of highly educated and technologically capable people that are running social engineering campaigns on an unknowing populace.
For what purpose? To control everyone.
Yeah.
Huh.
So it was engineered in the last half of the decade of the 1940s, which is what I'm exploring with Tyler, being developed in the last half of the 1940s. The new quiet war machine stood, so to speak, in sparkling gold-plated hardware on the showroom by 1954. So they've been using this hyper-advanced communication system for social engineering since 1954. It's just now it's becoming obvious.
Wow.
We start realizing that this silent weapon system is a big, giant network that's all of connected people who are trying to control the future to create a free market economy where there's literally no laws.
Wow.
the computer has to be able to predict the future. So that means to accurately predict the future, the computer has to be really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that computer needs to communicate really, really fast. So it needs a really, really fast global computer network.
So that's basically the purpose of Fermilab, is to create this neutrino network for communicating at light speed and creating a planet-scale quantum computing environment that you've described in some of our previous conversations. Is that correct?
So I'll read this from the document. It might help even better.
Sure.
In order to achieve predictable economy, the low class elements of society must be brought under total control, i.e. must be housebroken, trained, and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from the very early age. Before they have an opportunity to question the propriety of the matter, in order to achieve such conformity, the lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government-operated daycare centers for the occupationally orphaned children.
That's crazy.
The quality of education given to the lower class must be that of the poorest sort. Wow. So that the most of ignorance, isolating the inferior class from the superior class, is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. So what they're doing is they're separating the education by such a great distance that what the superior class knows is completely incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. Wow. This form of slavery is essential to maintain measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class.
Wow. And this is in that book, Silent
Yeah,
Wars.
it's all here.
The Moment of Truth. QAnon discloses secret space program by David Wilcock. Part 1. The secret space program. On Wednesday, September 19th, 2018, the mysterious QAnon revealed that we are not alone in the universe, and that we do indeed have a secret space program. This is arguably the single most exciting development we've had in the entire time we've been doing this research, which has been full-time since February 1993. QAnon is the only officially sanctioned voice of the Alliance today, a high-level group diligently working to create mass arrests of the cabal and disclosure. Q has since gone silent for 17 days as of October 9th, 2018, suggesting that something big is in the works. A letter was posted that day apologizing for the delays. We may therefore be going through the final crunch time where complete silence is needed for operational security before the Alliance finishes the job.
So basically, in a series of projects, specifically projects relating to technology and space and aerospace, we have seen this theme over and over again rising up. And the theme is that when a project goes black, it develops this X steganography. But what we did is we followed it all the way through to how the X term even became something that we would identify with technology, or how X became this thing that was used over and over again. And although it has traditional uses, certainly, what we're looking for is a very specific type of steganography. And again, steganography being something that is a little bit different than cryptology, whereas cryptology is something that's out there that you need to break the code and you have to figure it out, and people spend their lives trying to break certain types of codes. That's a certain type of coding that goes on. Steganography is completely the opposite, where no one can see that there's a code there. It's something that only people who know, when they look at it, understand what it is, and it's designed that way. When things like that get used in, say, hiding something like the UFO file, or in hiding advanced technology that's out there and the people involved with it, we need a code, we need a key in, we need a way into that system. And the X steganography started to become very obvious that I could pick up patterns and predict where the X was going to show up in different projects. Once I started to see that pattern happen, it got deeper and deeper, because when you get into the political process and the kind of secrecy and the wall of secrecy that we study so much on this show, It's kind of interesting because the first thing that we tripped into was that Eisenhower had this time capsule named Project X, which is something that is going to be opened up in 2053. And Eisenhower, one of the main items in the time capsule actually is Nixon, which is also kind of interesting. But that time capsule was called Project X, and it has, it's been covered even by mainstream journalists like Evan Thomas, the ultimate kind of CFR Newsweek insider type guy. So it's not something that we're just, getting word of mouth on. People know that this thing exists. And then we go later, of course, Robert Merritt on this program, who was a Houston Plan insider, told us about Nixon using this Planet X steganography when talking about this message to the American people that he was hiding in a time capsule. And there's that time capsule theme again. LBJ had this letter, which was letter X, which is now actually at the LBJ library. And that is something that was supposed to be open 50 years after his death. Well, guess what? He died in 1973, so that's in 2023. He will be, the person at the LBJ library will be able to open that letter. They may decide not to. And I have to say, we've discovered things like that just haven't been out there, like links from Nixon to Trump. And just looking at how the X was used in Walter Dornberger's program, one of the paperclip Nazis, the Blue Gemini information regarding a second space program. These are things that were just hanging out there in what I call stealth archives. So they're stealth archives. We know that they're there. Like the JFK records that recently didn't come out, that the president had promised were going to come out. It's, when these things get blocked. So we know that there are records relating to the Kennedy assassination, and we know that they're important. But we also know that for some reason, we can't see them. So stealth archives is very important when you're dealing with the thrust of what we're talking about in this X series. We arrived at a point in the mid-19th century, about 1840, where there was a series of moves that were going to make scientific materialism absolutely, the law of the land. And that the types of things that had happened and the things that were going on before, studies about ether, studies about mesmerism, and all these different things, were going to hit a real impasse because everything was going to be turned over to this scientific materialism. And this was the influence of a scientific community that had lost their connection with the spiritual world. But there were also, according to Steiner, and from the understanding of Theosophy, entities behind it that were trying to disconnect average people, humanity, from the spiritual understanding, because then they have a much easier, it's much easier to harvest them. So this is a very deep esoteric concept that we need to get into. And the mystery schools are really something that's fascinating that we need to understand and keep in mind with all the things that we do. Because when we're tracking things that are mysteries that relate to the UFO file, that relate to hidden political power, there's always, the mystery schools are right at the heart of it. And they're making decisions. And you can consider them kind of like an invisible power base of things that happen. It's incumbent on these schools to protect these methods, to protect these histories, to protect these things, until such a time where the culture has risen up enough and they let them out. The problem is, because we can't see a lot of that activity, there are competing groups around this. And so it makes it a very dynamic situation. And the X, what it does is, once we start to understand what it is and we see the naming convention, we start to understand the people in these positions moving technology along under the nose of the public, under the nose of the agencies that fund these things, under the committees and all the rest of it. And it's a way that the people who need to organize that stuff can see it. And so for other people, they're just like, oh, it's funding for the X73B or whatever it would happen to be. They'll understand it on that level. And then on the deeper level, these groups will understand there's our X moving around. It's related to this web. And you could say that the web is technology. I think that's a fine way to put at it. But we have to think of technology in a particular way. We can think of technology embalming is a kind of technology, for example. Ancient Egyptian embalming, that actually represents a technology. So we can't just think of things in terms of high-tech space weapons. We have to go a little bit deeper in our definitions of what technology is. What I found out when we were doing this is that we're actually tracking the X as a way of tracking the UFO file. But it goes deeper than that, because over the last 70 years, sure, these agencies have hidden things related to UFOs. But it's a little bit different, because what's happening is there's an effect that they're hiding. And that's where the mystery schools come in. And that's where we get much better education about what they're dealing with. This is the effect that happens via the X technology. And again, the effect being apophthegm. That is something that is changing the nature of reality by interrelating with it. And this seems to be the big concern from our own national security state, going back through the mystery schools, and then even further back into history and the early Masonic orders and the Egyptian mystery schools and the Pythagorean schools are all referencing this effect.